she took him back to court because she wanted to get on with her life and get away from him.
And she had gotten the girls, something that he said would never happen if she left him.
Sheila Bellush, a stay-at-home mom with 2 preteen girls, was about to embark on a new adventure. After her messy divorce from Alan, she decided to have her tubes tied, closing the door on that chapter of her life. But love has a way of rewriting stories. When she met Jamie, they both yearned for a child, a fresh start and a shared dream. They opted for in vitro fertilization, knowing it was both expensive and uncertain. IVF could result in multiples, or perhaps nothing at all, depending on how Sheila's body responded to the multiple embryos. In 1995, IVF was a different landscape, less predictable, less refined. Sheila's quadruplet pregnancy was a great success, but still a delicate situation, demanding rest and care. As she nurtured these new lives within her, her eyes remained glued to the drama unfolding on the NBC miniseries Dead by Sunset. Dead by Sunset told the true story of Cheryl Keaton, whose lifeless body was found in her van along Oregon's Sunset Highway. Cheryl's death wasn't an accident, it was the tragic result of domestic violence. Cheryl was locked in a fierce divorce and custody battle over her 3 sons with her husband, Bradley Morris Cunningham. He was convicted of her murder in 1986. The trial captured the attention of Anne Rule, a renowned true crime author. It inspired her to write about the ordeal in her 1995 best-selling book of the same name. The story resonated with Sheila, and she couldn't tear herself away from it. For her, this wasn't just entertainment, it was a reflection of her own struggles. Alan, her ex-husband, hadn't just left her with emotional scars. He fought relentlessly against her having custody of their 2 daughters. He even found legal loopholes to reduce his child support payments, determined to make Sheila suffer. And if that weren't enough, Sheila's friend Sue had also fallen victim to domestic violence, murdered by her ex-husband Chuck during their own messy divorce. The docudrama hit home for Sheila, stirring memories of pain, resilience, and the haunting echoes of Sue's tragic fate. Sheila and Sue were more than just friends. They were survivors. Their exes, Alan and Carl, could charm the socks off anyone in public, but at home they were a whole different story. The women had found each other in the middle of all this chaos, and it was like they just got each other. After Sue's death, Sheila couldn't shake the thought that it could have been her. She could have been the one who didn't make it, leaving her kids to fend for themselves. The thought haunted her, especially during those long nights when Alan's threats would replay in her mind like a broken record. Alan had everyone fooled. He strutted around like he was the next big thing in medical tech with his Healthtronic device. He talked a good game about curing paralysis and turning back the clock on aging, and people bought it, hook, line, and sinker. He got loans, attracted investors, and lived it up. But when the FDA stepped in and shut it all down, the house of cards came tumbling down. But Alan wasn't the type to give up. He packed up their lives and moved them to San Antonio, far away from the previous failures. He talked up his past achievements and kept quiet about the mess he'd left behind. Sheila went along with it, trying to keep the family together, hoping things would be different this time. But the new life in Texas wasn't the fresh start Sheila had hoped for. Alan's cheating got worse, and he was into all sorts of stuff in the bedroom that Sheila didn't sign up for. She was cut off from her family, totally dependent on Alan, and trapped in a marriage that was anything but healthy. At one point, Alan even moved his mistress in with them. Alan's violence would sweep through their home like an angry storm, leaving Sheila bruised and battered. But the final straw came when she suspected that Alan did something terrible to their older daughter, Stevie. That was it, the point of no return. Sheila filed for divorce, determined to break free from the web of lies and abuse. The court battles were grueling, but she fought tooth and nail for custody of her girls. It was a battle she couldn't afford to lose. Sue had stood by her side, a fellow survivor who understood the scars that couldn't be seen. Sheila sat curled up on the couch. The movie playing hit so close to home. She picked up the phone and called her sister Carrie. "Hey, it's me," Sheila said, trying to sound casual. "This movie on TV, it's about a woman who didn't make it out. Reminds me of Sue, you know?" Sheila took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling. Alan's got rights to see the girls now. What if he tries to take them? I'm out of money and I can't stop him in court. The fear was real and it ate at her. Sheila's voice grew more serious. "Carrie, if something happens to me, don't think it's an accident. Make sure there's an investigation. And call that author, Anne Rule. Have her tell the world about my story." When the babies came, Sheila's life was a juggling act. With the quadruplets, every day was a marathon of feedings, diaper changes, and little moments of joy. The older girls, now teenagers, were a different challenge altogether. And then there was Alan's new family setup, adding another layer of complexity. Daryl, the youngest, lived in her own little bubble. She soaked up the attention from Alan and his new wife. It was a change from the strict vibe at home. Jamie, a former Marine, ran a tight ship. His rules stood in stark contrast to Alan's laissez-faire approach. At Alan's house, the girls enjoyed freedom, no curfews, no restrictions. Stevie, the oldest, tested boundaries, seeking independence. Hanging out with friends during Alan's visitations felt like a taste of adulthood, away from the rules at her mom's place. Jamie, firm and disciplined, believed in old-school methods like spanking, which often led to clashes with the girls. Sheila was caught in the middle. She didn't believe in spanking, knowing it often did more harm than good. But with her hands full with the babies and her teenage daughter's rebellion, she felt stretched too thin to address everything. The girls didn't take kindly to his strict ways and would find another escape at Pat's house next door. Pat's daughter was around the same age as Sheila's girls, and their house became a refuge for complaints and tales of woe. The girls' stories of Jamie's discipline might have grown in the telling. What Jamie saw as a normal punishment, they painted as something harsher. Pat, protective and concerned, didn't hesitate to act. She called the police, worried about what she heard. She even reached out to Alan, stirring the pot of an already simmering feud between him and Sheila. Stevie's trips to see her dad started to dwindle. Rumors circulated, the kind that no one wants to believe about a father and his daughter. Despite this, Alan was relentless, fighting for custody and claiming the girls were being hurt by Sheila and Jamie, who he said was turning them against him. Stevie's reluctance to visit him seemed to prove his point. Pat, the neighbor, added fuel to the fire with her stories, leading Alan to take his fight to the courts. Sheila was left wondering when it would all end. The end came, but not in a way anyone expected. In a courtroom filled with tension, Alan did the unimaginable. He asked to give up his rights as a father. He stood there, tears in his eyes, claiming the ongoing conflict was too much for everyone, especially the kids. He said stepping back was the best thing for Sheila's daughters and his new family. But he pointed the finger at Sheila, saying it was her doing that pushed him to this decision. The girls ended up stuck in the middle, feeling hurt and confused. Stevie, possibly a victim of her father's worst actions, was left with a deep sense of loss despite everything. Daryl, too young to grasp it all, felt anger and sadness, and she couldn't help but blame Sheila. Alan's decision to step away might have been driven by more than just the custody battle. There were the rumors about his sexual preferences, things he may have feared would come to light. His choice to give his daughters gender-neutral names was no coincidence. He had been using their social security numbers for loans, a secret that could unravel his life if exposed. His behavior had become increasingly erratic, and he had a growing gambling addiction. Alan needed all this to go away, and dissolving his parental rights was just the first step in his plan. Alan's vendetta against Sheila was relentless. On the golf course, he'd casually drop hints about his worries for his children, carefully omitting the fact that he'd relinquished his parental rights. To anyone within earshot, Sheila was the villain in his tale. He spun his stories with a mix of charm and concern, a performance perfected by years of deception. His friend Danny, who also happened to be his gambling bookie, became a key player in Alan's scheme. Over games of golf, Alan floated a dangerous idea. Could Danny find someone willing to intimidate or even harm Sheila? The bait was a lucrative share in a golf course Alan claimed he was close to buying. Meanwhile, Alan kept the lines of communication open with Pat, the neighbor. He mined her for information about the kids, any tidbit he could twist to use against Sheila. It was an obsession, a game to him, where winning meant seeing Sheila suffer. To add to the family stress, Jamie received news of a transfer to Florida. The move meant uprooting the family, pulling the kids away from their friends and everything familiar. The thought of starting over was daunting, and the tension at home rose with the uncertainty of the future. Sheila and Jamie took a quick trip to scope out places to live, while the girls stayed home. After a few days, Sheila flew back while Jamie stayed behind to tie up loose ends. At home, Daryl had been slipping away to Pat's place next door to call Alan. Even though Alan had given up being a dad on paper, he wasn't ready to let her go. Sheila walked into this mess when she got back from Florida, and it was too much. She snapped, shouting at Daryl, and, in a moment of anger, she did something she never thought she would. She hit Daryl with a belt, just like Jamie had done before. Daryl escaped to Pat's house scared and hurt. Pat took photos of the belt marks and didn't hesitate to call the police. When the officers arrived, they arrested Sheila, and her world turned upside down. Sheila's arrest sent shockwaves through the local community, especially since she was known as the Quad Mom. The news latched onto the story, splashing headlines like "Quad Mom facing child abuse charges." Alan, watching from the sidelines, couldn't hide his twisted satisfaction seeing Sheila's name drag through the mud. Daryl was caught in the middle. She couldn't go back to living with Alan. His impulsive decision to give up his parental rights had come back to haunt him. He regretted it now, but it was too late. Daryl was placed in state care, a system already too familiar with the family due to the previous custody battles. Child Protective Services, with their caseworkers who knew the family's history, stepped in to investigate. Amidst this turmoil, the family's move to Florida was still on. It was a secret operation. They didn't want the neighbors or Alan to catch wind of their new location. The move couldn't wait, even for court hearings. Sheila was stuck in a tough spot, having to fly back for the legal proceedings while trying to start over in Florida. Pat made a move to adopt Daryl and even brought on Alan's lawyer to strengthen her case. However, CPS saw the situation differently. They recognized the incident as an isolated event and not reflective of a harmful environment. With the charges against Sheila dropped, they arranged for Daryl to join her mother in Florida. Daryl would live in a halfway house, receiving the counseling she needed to work through her anger towards Sheila. Visitation between mother and daughter would be gradual, allowing time for their relationship to mend. Alan, meanwhile, was seething with anger. With his influence waning, he decided it was time to enact the plan he'd been contemplating. Alan had set up an 800 number, telling Daryl it was just for her, so she could call him anytime she wanted. From the halfway house, Daryl would sneak calls to her dad. Alan, with his smooth talk, made each conversation seem like a game, coaxing little pieces of information from Daryl. Piece by piece, he put together the puzzle of the family's new life in Florida. On a quiet November day in 1997, a local resident noticed a stranger in the tight-knit neighborhood. It was the kind of place where unfamiliar faces were rare, and this one was hard to miss. Dressed in sandy-colored camo, the man had an unsettling air about him. The resident, with a keen eye for detail, took note of the license plate on the stranger's white car, committing the numbers to memory. But in his focus, he overlooked one crucial detail. The plate's colors didn't match Florida tags. It was a Texas plate, a clue to the stranger's origins. Little did the resident know, the man's presence would soon send shockwaves through the community. Stevie burst through the door that day, excited to tell her mom about a boy from school who said he liked her back. Jamie was still at work. His sales job kept him on the road a lot, and he wouldn't be back until after dinner. The quiet of the house was deceptive. No one had heard the muffled gunshot aimed at Sheila's face, the towel wrapped around the gun muffling the sound, but causing it to jam. The intruder, realizing his plan had gone south, had discarded the useless weapon and snatched a knife from the kitchen. What Stevie walked into was a scene ripped from a nightmare. The quads, she thought, where were they? Tiny red footprints painted a chilling path throughout the house. In a state of shock, Stevie dialed 911, her voice trembling as she told the operator that her mom was gone, and she feared her dad was behind it. When Daryl heard about her mother's death, she was crushed. Sure, she was mad at her mom, but this? Deep down, a part of her suspected her dad might be involved. It was a thought she hated to even consider. The Florida police didn't waste any time putting Alan on their list of suspects. But as they dug deeper, they hit a wall. Alan had covered his tracks well. His alibi was solid, backed by plenty of witnesses who had seen him around that weekend. He played the part of the grieving ex-husband to perfection, insisting that despite everything, he would never want harm to come to the mother of his children. The Florida police hit a dead end with the plate number YBR62G. It was nowhere in their system. But when they ran the number through Texas records, they found it. It was registered to a Maria del Toro. She told the police the car was a gift to her grandson Joey. A good boy, she called him, who worked as a personal trainer and was quite popular with the ladies. She suggested they might find him at one of his girlfriend's places. At one of Joey's girlfriend's houses, the police uncovered a trail of evidence that kicked the investigation into high gear. It was the break they needed, and from there, the pieces started to fall into place. Joey's statements to one of his girlfriends was that he, quote, did something he shouldn't have, a vague confession that set off alarm bells. Another girlfriend found herself caught up in the mess when he asked her to dispose of some clothes he'd left at her place. She was confused when he called her from a Florida number, but he claimed he was there for work. The police leaned on these women, and under the weight of their questioning, the truth began to spill out. Joey had painted himself as a hired hand dealing with a man's ex-wife troubles. But stories weren't enough for the police. They needed hard evidence or a direct confession from Joey Del Toro. In a strategic move, the police turned to one of the women, asking her to lure Joey into a meeting. However, Joey was one step ahead. The next call she received from him came from a motel, not in Florida, but in Mexico, in a small town near the border of Texas. As the investigation unfolded, more accomplices in the plot emerged. One individual was identified as the person who provided Joey with the gun. Then there was Joey's cousin Danny, the bookie from Alan's golf club, whose name kept popping up. While the net widened, Joey himself was a ghost, on the run in Mexico, evading capture. All the while, Alan carried on with life, seemingly unfazed by the turmoil around him. Sheila's sister Carrie stepped in to take care of Daryl, who was now torn from her family. Jessie, learning that Daryl had given away their location to Alan, found it impossible to forgive her. The family was fractured. The Quads and Stevie stayed with Jamie, while Daryl faced an uncertain future. The Texas police collaborated with Mexican authorities in the hunt for Joey, but the chase hit a snag when immigration issues stalled their efforts. They managed to apprehend Joey, but now faced the lengthy process of extradition. It seemed talking to Joey would have to wait, as the wheels of international law turned slowly. Within 2 weeks of Sheila's tragic death, the 3 conspirators were in custody. But linking Alan to the crime was like untangling a complex web. Investigators combed through phone logs and financial records, delving into the gambling connections that threaded through the case. Under the heavy weight of potential charges for conspiracy to commit capital murder, Danny and the other men began to crack. The story of the money trail emerged, and in a bid for lighter sentences, they turned on each other. Joey, detained by Mexican authorities, also pointed the finger at Alan as the mastermind who bankrolled the grim plot. Yet when it came to answering questions, Alan remained silent, a fortress of denial. His legal team worked to downplay his involvement, suggesting the investigation was biased due to the bitter divorce. But the police continued the investigation, meticulously combing through the phone records of everyone connected to the case. They conducted interviews, piecing together a clearer picture of Alan's activities. It emerged that Alan had enlisted a co-worker to help locate Sheila, demonstrating his determination to track her down. His call to the bail bond company that had facilitated Sheila's release was a calculated move. He managed to extract a forwarding address for Sheila, a P.O. box in Florida. Unbeknownst to Alan, all incoming calls were recorded by the company.
Yes, ma'am. Do you folks have a bond on a Sheila Bellush for $5,000?
I can't release that information. I don't know who you are.
Okay, what I'm trying to figure out is that, well, I'm somebody that they owe money to and they skipped out of state on me.
With Alan's voice captured on tape, the evidence began to mount. He had also hired a private investigator who, with the information gleaned from Daryl's phone calls, managed to obtain Sheila's new address. The PI's detailed business records became a treasure trove for the police, linking Alan directly to the pursuit of Sheila. The net tightened as a warrant was issued, allowing investigators to scrutinize Alan's financial records. It was a web of transactions and inquiries that painted a stark portrait of a man who would stop at nothing to find Sheila. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and with each new discovery, the case against Alan grew stronger. The evidence was building up over the course of many months, a period that stretched into a year and beyond. As time passed, the conspirators were gradually processed by the criminal justice system. Alan, in a bid to strengthen his defense, enlisted the services of a high-profile criminal defense lawyer. This lawyer denied any involvement on Alan's part, painting the other conspirators as desperate individuals willing to say anything to evade punishment. However, when Danny's case finally went to trial, more than a year later, the prosecution presented a solid case against the conspirators. Another conspirator had already accepted a plea deal, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. This testimony was a linchpin in the case, serving to corroborate the mountain of evidence against them. A second guilty verdict would not only cement the case against Alan, but also implicate Joey as the triggerman. Danny was found guilty, and he was sentenced to life without parole. With Danny's chapter closed, the legal gears turned towards Joey, who had been extradited and was now facing trial. Despite the pressure of the investigation, Alan continued to assert his innocence, telling anyone who would listen, and even appearing on television to claim he had no part in the crime. Meanwhile, he carried on with his life, indulging in lavish vacations and leisurely rounds of golf, presenting an image of a man without a care. It was on January 4th, 2000, that Alan's facade of normalcy was shattered when he was arrested for the murder of Sheila Bellush, setting the stage for his own legal battle. In a surprising move, Alan chose to testify in his own trial. The defense's approach hinged on the accusation of child abuse by Sheila and attempting to discredit the conspirators' statements against Alan. They aimed to portray Alan as a victim of a conspiracy, not its architect. The prosecution was unyielding in their cross-examination, focusing on Alan's decision to give up his parental rights and the stark reality that he had not communicated with his daughters for 3 years, essentially since their mother's passing. The powerful testimonies of Stevie and Daryl against Alan added a deeply personal dimension to the case. The jury's extended deliberation period did not yield a quick verdict, which is often seen as a positive sign for the defense. However, on July 6, 2000, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically as Joey had submitted a guilty plea. Shortly thereafter, the jury returned with their verdict for Alan as well. He was found guilty on all charges, a decision that brought closure to a complex and emotionally charged case. A few months earlier, Anne Rule, the true crime author, got an email from Carrie. Carrie shared memories of the talk she had had with Sheila all the way back in 1995. She told Anne about Sheila's request. In 2001, Anne Rule granted Sheila's wish. The book, Every Breath You Take, tells Sheila's story as if Sheila herself was speaking from the past, ensuring her voice and her story will not be forgotten. Alan's journey through the justice system ended with a life sentence, but his story reached its final conclusion on November 18, 2014, when he passed away at the age of 59. Sheila Bellush had an eerie premonition about her fate and wanted her story shared. Her concerns about her safety were tragically validated. What do you think about her request from beyond the grave? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more. As always, you can share your opinions or suggestions in the comments. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next video, where we'll explore another story hidden within the wrinkles in crime.